Hello and welcome. My name is Elizabeth Kitamura, and today we will be learning about used lead-acid battery recycling, also known as ULABs. We will hear from an interprofessional team as we brainstorm a safer disposal method of ULABs that will decrease the health risks from lead exposure for workers and their communities, while maintaining a form of sustenance for many people in lower and middle income countries. The purpose of today's talk is to explore feasible interventions for safer global ULAB recycling. These are our objectives. Used lead-acid batteries are found in cars, trucks, and other vehicles. While places like the US and the EU have regulated industries for the proper recycling of batteries, and many lower and middle income countries, recycling happens in informal, unlicensed, and sometimes illegal operations. This practice provides a livelihood for many families as the price of lead is $1.10 per pound, and as Dr. Caravanos taught, there is about 22 pounds of lead in each car battery. Therefore, a person could fetch about $24.20 per battery to feed their family. A typical breakdown of the battery includes breaking open the case, often with a hatchet or axe, spilling the acid out on the ground, accessing the lead, smelting the lead in furnaces that release toxic fumes and create toxic dust, sometimes sifting the soil to capture more of the leftover lead for melting, and finally reselling the collected material. The exposure pathways for lead are through ingestion and inhalation, and in children we often see hand-to-mouth exposure. This figure from the World Health Organization helps us see the effects of elevated blood lead levels in children and adults. As you can see, neurological effects can be significant, with decreased cognitive performance, anemia, impaired renal function, and even encephalopathy or death, to name a few of the health effects. There is no safe exposure level to lead. It is an especially harmful toxicant as it accumulates in a person, and once exposed, though there are some interventions like monitoring, chelation therapy, and hospitalization, once exposed, the health effects from lead exposure do remain even after treatment. Let us now hear from our professionals. Our first professional approach is from an executive business development manager with expertise in the chemical industry. Their most likely intervention is to solidify the lead in batteries, which in turn creates a safer disposal mechanism because the lead will not leach into the ground as it stays in solid form. This would continue the livelihood for families while protecting workers and families from lead exposure, as a solid-state battery is safer and easier to work with. The difficulty with this intervention is the increased cost to producers. A less likely intervention is price controls. Lead is the cheapest semi-precious metal compared to cadmium and lithium, so businesses could decide to use more expensive metals. Lower middle-income countries may choose the cheaper option, though, since they do not have the money to purchase more expensive semi-precious metals. Our second professional approach is from a customs broker. Their suggestion is to incentivize the safe disposal of ULABs. They want to make sure that the more valuable or lucrative method is the correct disposal method for recycling. The difficulty with this intervention is that it is difficult to track if processes are truly being followed. A less likely intervention is to promote ethical supply chains in multinational companies. This would ensure that the proper disposal methods and correct use of PPE are being followed. Again, this is difficult to enforce due to the expensive nature of enforcement, and oftentimes companies can only control 1 to 2 levels back in their supply chain. Our third approach is from an attorney, and their most likely intervention is to enforce companies to not accept improperly disposed ULABs. They would hold companies responsible, since companies are now aware of the health effects of their products, which in turn mitigates future lawsuits. The difficulty with this intervention is that more families would lose income, but due to a cost-benefit analysis, the benefit to long-term human health is greater than the current loss of income. A less likely intervention is to create and enforce regulations to make companies collect and recycle all product components in any country where their product is sold. Again, the difficulty with this intervention is the huge cost increase to companies, with little incentive to enforce without significant governmental penalties. What is our interprofessional recommendation? It is subsidies through taxation for a multi-pronged approach. Any multinational corporation who uses a lead-acid battery in their products should be required to give a tax to a multinational government regulatory board akin to how superfunds are funded in the U.S. This tax would be collected and added to a public-private partnership fund consisting of first, subsidies from countries, and second, taxes from companies that will fund the following interventions and safe disposal mechanisms. 1. Using a solid-state lead battery. 2. Making the safe way to recycle ULABs the more lucrative way. And 3. Legally enforce companies to only accept lead derived from safe recycling practices. This proposed multi-pronged intervention will continue the livelihood of families while simultaneously protecting workers and their communities from lead exposure. So how does this intervention match what the communities request? In a recent survey issued by the United Nations Environmental Programs, 102 countries were asked about their current ULAB recycling practices, and 40 countries responded to the survey. Their needs are on this slide. As you remember from my suggested interprofessional intervention on the previous slide, my proposal fulfills the first 3 bullet points: technical building by solidifying the lead in batteries, the promotion of a public-private partnership to ensure that the proper recycling method is the more lucrative method for workers, and these interventions will occur through the passing of enforceable legislation. All of our interventions will require subsidies and taxes to assist the many supply chain producers and multinational corporations in executing and maintaining safer practices in ULAB recycling, as it will increase production costs, and through a multinational fund, the increased cost will not be passed down to consumers. In our lecture from Dr. Robson, he shared that money solves most public health concerns, and after doing this hypothetical project, I wholeheartedly agree with him. What did I learn through doing this interprofessional project? 3 things. 1, it is hard to educate others that the abolition of ULAB recycling is not a feasible intervention. 2, the chemical industry appears to have the most readily accessible solutions. And 3, only a multifaceted intervention will work. Even though there is no surefire solution to the problem of informal ULAB recycling, we keep trying in order to ensure the future health of our planet and especially of our populations. Thank you for taking the time to learn with me today.